Okay, so welcome to Our Ministries Australia, and this is the second session of the Footsteps of the Messiah, a study of the last days. So let's kick off. Our last session was just an introductory session. Tonight we're going to look at a thing called the times of the Gentiles. Now, in Luke chapter 21, Jesus is talking to his disciples, and he's telling him about a time in the future when Jerusalem would be surrounded. He said this would be a time of desolation. There's going to be a great distress upon the earth, and especially against the Jewish people. He said, and they shall fall by the edge of the sword and shall be led captive into all the nations, and Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. So, the times of the Gentiles is a specific period of time cut out of history. But what is it? What did Jesus mean? Basically, it's that long period of time from the Babylonian Empire to the second coming of Messiah, during which time the Gentiles have dominance over the city of Jerusalem specifically, and the Jewish people in general. Now, why did we start at the Babylonian Empire? Because that was the empire that destroyed Jerusalem in 586 BC and took Judah into captivity. And this was when Daniel and his three friends and Ezekiel, this was a time around this time period, they all went into Babylonian captivity. Now, if we were to look back through history, we'll see that there are periods of times when the Jews did control Jerusalem, but these were only temporary. Jerusalem will be under Gentile domination until the second coming, when the Jewish king, Messiah Jesus, will take his place on the throne in Jerusalem. Now, temporary control was exercised during the Maccabean period, which is 164 to 163 BC. And then we had the first Jewish revolt against Rome in AD 66-67. And we had the second Jewish revolt against Rome, which was the Bar Kokhba revolt. And that was in AD 132 to 135. So in these short periods of time, the Jews have been in control of Jerusalem. And since 1967, after the Six-Day War, Jerusalem has been under Jewish control primarily. Even today, it's still a temporary control of Jerusalem even today. And then what we're going to see is that in the period of the tribulation, Jerusalem will once again be under total Gentile domination for a period of 3.5 years, when the one world ruler, the Antichrist, will rule. So the times of the Gentiles can only end when Gentiles can no longer tread down the city of Jerusalem. And that's going to happen when Messiah Jesus returns. Now, to understand the times of the Gentiles, there are 4 passages which we're going to have to look at. We'll look at 2 of them tonight. And this gives us a sweep of history and into the future. Now, each of these passages we're going to look at, each of them will build upon what the previous one taught us. It's going to give us more information until we have a big picture of what's actually going to happen in this times of the Gentiles. Now, these passages are Daniel chapter 2, verses 31 to 45, Daniel chapter 7, verses 1 to 28, and then Revelation chapter 13, 1 to 10, and Revelation 17, 7 to 14. In Daniel chapter 2, 31 to 45, we have Nebuchadnezzar's dream and interpretation. Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. This is King Nebuchadnezzar, and he has a dream, and Daniel has to interpret it for him. In Daniel 2, 31 to 35 is the actual dream. There were King sawest, and behold, a great image. This image, which was mighty and whose brightness was excellent, stood before thee, and the aspect thereof was terrible. As for this image, its head was of fine gold, its breast and its arms of silver, its belly and its thighs of brass, legs of iron, its feet part of iron, part of clay. So if we have a look at this this great image, it was an awesome image. It has a head of gold, the breast and the arms composed of silver, the belly and thighs of brass, legs of iron, and then the feet were composed part iron, part clay. Now, if you look at this from the head down, we start at gold, we end down with iron. So what we see is, looking down, we see that the types of metal, gold to iron, these metals actually increase in strength, one over the other. Silver is stronger than gold, brass stronger than silver, iron stronger than brass. But they also decrease in value. Gold more valuable than iron. And we're going to see, as we look at these empires, these images, we're going to see that these will represent empires, with one empire increasing in strength over another, but their value decreases. That is, when I say their value, their intrinsic value, their character of authority and rule decrease. Daniel said that, this is verse 34. He says, he now says there's a stone that comes into view here. And Daniel says, he said here, thou sawest till, this is him telling Nebuchadnezzar the dream, thou sawest till that a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon its feet that were of iron and clay, and brake them in pieces. Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, and the gold broken in pieces together, and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away, so that no place was found for them. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. So in his dream of this image, gold, silver, brass, and iron, this stone comes and smashes the image on its feet. And the image is destroyed, because it says no place was found for them. They disappeared from history. It says this stone was cut without hands. What does that mean? It means that it was of divine origin. And this stone then became a great mountain that fills the entire earth. We're going to see that there are 4 Gentile empires that will dominate Jerusalem. Now we have the interpretation of the dream in Daniel 2, 36 to 45. In Daniel 37 to 38, Daniel tells Nebuchadnezzar that Nebuchadnezzar is the head of gold, the head of the Babylonian Empire. Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar started the times of the Gentiles when he destroyed Jerusalem and the temple in 586 BC. So Babylon is the first Gentile empire of the times of the Gentiles. He begins it. Now, God gave to Nebuchadnezzar control of the whole inhabited earth, according to Jeremiah 27 verses 5 to 8. However, he never took it up. The second Gentile empire we see in verse 39, and it is the one where we have 2 arms of silver united into the breast of silver. Now, we know from history, and we'll see later, that the Medo-Persian Empire followed the Babylonian Empire. As silver is inferior to the Babylonian Empire, the gold, neither did it have the unity, the inner unity of Babylon, because the Medes and the Persians, though they were united into one empire, they never actually fused into one people. And their government was not above the mistakes of the law. So their government had to adhere to the law, whereas King Nebuchadnezzar, he was above the law. He could do what he liked. Now, the third empire we see in the second part of verse 39. And here we read, and another third kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth. So the Medo-Persian Empire was followed by the third Gentile empire, which was the Greek or Hellenistic Empire. This was the belly and 2 thighs of brass. Now, territorially, they embraced both the east and the west. this Greek or Hellenistic empire was also given the grant to rule over all the earth by God, but they didn't take it up either. Now, verses 40 to 43 of chapter 2 of Daniel gives us the fourth Gentile empire, and this one we're going to call imperialism. And as we go through, we'll see why. We'll use that term to identify this fourth empire in its entirety. Now, this empire is going to go through several stages. We find in verse 40, it says, this is interpreting the dream here, or the dream. It said, "Then the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron, for as much as iron breaketh in pieces and subdueth all kingdoms, and as iron that crushes all these, shall it break in pieces and crush." Now, this fourth Gentile empire, which we're going to call imperialism, the first stage that we see here is, this is the united stage. It is as strong as iron. It breaks in pieces, it subdues, and it crushes all the things above it, the gold, the silver, the brass. Now, this empire will crush everything. So let's just say this, let's call this the united stage. This is a united stage when it first starts off. This now is going to give way to the second stage, which is a two-division stage. It says iron and clay. It's a divided kingdom. Verse 41, "And whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, part of potter's clay, part of iron, it shall be a divided kingdom. But there shall be in it of the strength of the iron, for as much as thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay." So notice in this two-division stage, divided stage, there is still the strength of iron, but now it's mixed with the clay. From this divided stage, this two-division stage, we now move to a 10-division stage. Remember, we're looking at the fourth Gentile empire, which we call imperialism. It's going to go through stages. So we go from the united stage, the divided stage, two-division stage. Now we go to a 10-division stage, which we see in the 10 toes. In verse 42, "And as the toes of the feet were a part of iron and part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong, partly broken. And whereas thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men. But they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron doth not mingle with clay." So this is composed of iron and clay, part strong, part weak. You may put them together, but they'll always be visibly distinct. They can't blend. So unity is impossible in this 10-division stage. What we see is that this fourth empire totally subdues and crushes all that precedes it. Now, we've seen 4 Gentile empires. Now we're going to come to the 5th empire, but this one is not Gentile. This one's Jewish. Daniel says it happens in the days of those kings. Which kings? Referring to the 10 toes of the 10-division stage. There are 2 symbols used here, which are used consistently elsewhere in the scriptures. The stone, that's a symbol of the second person of the Trinity, God the Son, the Messiah of Israel, Jesus. The second is mountain. Whenever you see the mountain used as a symbol, it's a symbol of a king or a kingdom or a throne. Now, verse 44 says that in those days, in those days, what days? In those days, it says God will set up his own kingdom. The days are during the 10-division stage, in the 10 toes. So in those days, God will set up the kingdom, bringing to an end the domination of the other kingdoms. In verse 45, it says, "A stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and it did break in pieces the iron, the brass, the clay, the silver, and the gold." So The image of Gentile domination seen in this vision of Nebuchadnezzar with the head of gold, chest, arms of silver, a belly of bronze, and the feet of iron mixed with clay. The image of this Gentile domination is going to be smashed by the messianic stone on the toes, on the feet. When? The second coming of the Messiah. Now, there are several differences between the kingdom of God and these other empires. Now, as to their origin, the Gentile empires were of human origin, but God's kingdom is of divine origin. As to duration of time, all the Gentile empires are temporary. One after another, they're going to collapse, collapse and disappear. But God's kingdom will be without end. Another distinction is in the area of power. Gentile empires received their power by overcoming the previously existing empire. God's kingdom, however, is unconquerable. The others all fell one by one, and finally it was destroyed by this stone, which is the Messiah with the Messianic kingdom. Okay. Bit of a summary of Daniel 2:31 to 45. First up, we see four empires. We see the Babylonian Empire. We see what is the Medo-Persian Empire. We see the Hellenistic or Greek Empire. Then we see the fourth empire, which the fourth empire goes through three stages. It goes through the United Stage, the 2-division stage, and then the 10-division stage. And then we see the Messianic kingdom. Now in Daniel, this is the second passage of scripture we have to look at, Daniel chapter 7, verses 1 to 28. And we see the four visions of Daniel and the interpretation. In chapter 7, 1 to 28, we're going to get a repeat of all that chapter 2 had to say on the times of the Gentiles, but now we're going to have some more detail. In verse 2 to 6 is Daniel's first vision. Now, as his vision develops, he sees the four winds of heaven stirring up the great sea. The great sea is the Mediterranean Sea. It's a symbol of the Gentile world, and Isaiah 17:12 to 13 tells us that. So does Revelation 13:1, Revelation 17, verse 1 and 15. Now notice that these four winds are the same in number as the four Gentile empires we saw back in chapter 2. But in scripture, whenever you see the words, the winds of heaven, that often refers to God's sovereignty and providence. None of the four Gentile empires arises in history by accident or as a matter of course, but are a part of the divine plan of God who is in control. In verse 3, we see that four great beasts came up from the sea, diverse one from another. So these four beasts, these four Gentile empires, came up out of the sea, the Mediterranean Sea. So they came up out of the Mediterranean region. Now all four are Gentile, and each one is diverse one from another. Babylon was characterized by being regal. Medo-Persia was characterized as voluptuousness. The third empire was characterized by Greek culture, while the fourth was characterized by Roman imperialism. The first beast we see in chapter 7, verse 4. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. I beheld till the wings thereof were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand upon 2 feet as a man, and a man's heart was given to it. So this is lion-like with eagle's wings. This represents the Babylonian Empire, and you can find that in Jeremiah 4:7, Jeremiah 48:40, 49:19, and 22, and also Ezekiel 17, verse 3. As possible as it is for man to become a beast, Nebuchadnezzar became one, and you can have a look at that. Well, you know, he acted like one. You can see that back in Daniel chapter 4, verses 1 to 37. He lived like one for years. Now, Babylon eventually lost its beast-like characteristics and became more human. And there was a change from a lust for conquest to a preference for building and developing a highly cultured society. Second beast we see in verse 5, chapter 7. And behold, another beast, a second, like to a bear, and was raised up on one side, and 3 ribs were in its mouth, between its teeth, and they said thus unto it, Arise, devour much flesh. Now, if Nebuchadnezzar was a head of gold, the second beast corresponds to the chest of arms of silver. This is in Nebuchadnezzar's dream back in chapter 2. This is the Medo-Persian Empire. This is the one that followed Babylonian. So what Daniel sees is a creature which is bear-like. It looks like a bear, but it's a lopsided bear. Why? Because the Persians were by far the dominant power, and it was a lopsided alliance. We see this bear had 3 ribs in its mouth, between its teeth. These 3 ribs represent the 3 kingdoms conquered by the Medo-Persian forces, giving them their empire status. They conquered Lydia, Babylonia, and Egypt. A bear is less majestic than the lion. It's bulky and weighty. Medo-Persia conquered by force of numbers, especially Persia. I just threw soldiers at a war. Third beast we see in verse 6 is Hellenistic or Grecian. And lo, another like a leopard, which had upon its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast had also 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. So the third beast here represents the 3rd Gentile empire, the Hellenistic empire. And this corresponds to the image's belly and thighs of brass of chapter 2. It's leopard-like. It's not exactly a real leopard, but its primary features are leopard-like. The leopard is also less majestic than the lion. It is less bulky than the bear, and it is much swifter than both of them. The Grecian or Hellenistic empire, which it represents, was noted for its speed of conquest under its first king, Alexander the Great. The 4 wings of a bird represent the fact that after the death of Alexander the Great, the empire was divided into 4 divisions by his 4 generals. And the 4 heads represent the 4 generals who divided the empire up amongst themselves, and they were Ptolemy, Seleucus, Cassander, and Lysimachus. Now we come to the 4th beast. And this is the second vision in verses 7 to 8. This beast represents the legs of iron and the toes of iron of chapter 2. Behold, a 4th beast, terrible and powerful and strong exceedingly. And it had great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces and stamped the residue with its feet. And it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. Now, we have no animal-like description for this beast. It is unique. And the main emphasis about the 4th beast is that it is diverse, and it subdues and breaks in pieces all that precedes it, and it is ferocious. Now, this beast also have 10 horns at the beginning, but then we see in verse 8, an 11th horn arises. Daniel speaking, he said, I considered the horns, the 10 horns that is, and behold, there came up among them another horn, a little one, before which 3 of the first horns were plucked up by the roots. And then it goes on to say, and the mouth speaking great things. So this little horn, this 11th horn, uproots 3 horns and begins to speak great things. With the 3 of the 10 gone, this makes him now number 8, the 8th horn. This empire, this 4th Gentile empire, will go through several stages. In Daniel 7, 9 to 12, we have the 3rd vision. Here we have the Ancient of Days in verses 9 to 10. This is no longer upon the earth, not around the Mediterranean Sea area, but rather it is up in heaven, and it is of the throne of God the Father, described as the Ancient of Days. Verse 9, I beheld till thrones were placed, and one that was ancient of days did sit. His raiment was white as snow, and the hair of his head was like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames, and the wheels thereof burning fire. Fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. Thousands of thousands ministered unto him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The judgment was set, and the books were opened. What Daniel sees here is a vision of the angelic court. The angels of heaven have gathered for the purpose of serving as judges and passing judgment. The Ancient of Days, God the Father, sitting upon the throne, surrounded by myriads of angels. These hundreds of thousands of angels that are standing before the throne are ready to receive commands from God to carry out judgments. The text says, the judgment was set and the books were opened. Now in verse 11, we see the destruction of the fourth beast. Now, part of this judgment that these angels are going to carry out includes the destruction of the fourth beast. Daniel speaking, I beheld at that time because of the voice of the great words which the horn spoke. So it was at that time, as Daniel was engrossed with what the little horn was saying, the beast was slain and its body destroyed. So the emphasis here is that the fourth Gentile empire cannot really be destroyed until we come to the stage during which this little horn exists. The emphasis here is on this little horn. He's number 8. Now, when he describes the destruction of the fourth beast, he says 3 things. First, the beast was slain. Second, its body destroyed. And its third, its body was given to be burned with fire. Destroyed, done away with. Now we have the other 3 beasts in chapter 7, verse 12. And as for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. 2 things stated about the previous 3 beasts. Their dominion was taken away. Now, the dominion of Babylon came to an end when Medo-Persia conquered Babylon. Then their dominion ended with Alexander the Greek conquered Medo-Persians. Greek dominion ended with the Roman conquest of the Hellenistic Empire. So the dominion of each was indeed taken away. Now it says their lives prolonged for a season. We'll explain this when we get to Revelation chapter 13. Now, the fourth vision Daniel has. This is in verse 13 to 14, which is Daniel's last one in this chapter 7. He now moves towards the second coming and the end of the fourth empire, the fourth Gentile empire. And we see in verse 13 the second coming. Daniel says, I saw in the night visions, and behold, there came with the clouds of heaven one like unto a son of man, and he came even to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. So in verse 13, Daniel sees in vision, he sees the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven. Now, when used symbolically, clouds refers to the Shekinah glory. Shekinah glory is the visible manifestation of God's presence. But we're told many times that at the second coming, Messiah will return in the clouds of heaven or with the clouds of heaven. The angels brought him to the Ancient of Days, God the Father. In verse 14, and there was given him dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all the peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed. So what the Son of Man receives, the Messiah receives from the hand of God the Father, is the authority of the kingdom of God. Then in Daniel chapter 7, verses 15 to 28, we have the interpretation of what Daniel has seen. And Daniel asked for the interpretation in verses 15 to 16. And the summary of the interpretation we have in verses 17 to 18. Verse 17, we see the beast. These are the beasts. These great beasts, which are four kings that shall arise out of the earth. So he tells us that these four beasts represent four kings or four kingdoms that shall arise out of the earth. Now notice what it says here. It says they arise out of the earth. Earlier in chapter 7, 1 to 6, in the vision itself, they arose out of the sea. But here they arise out of the earth, showing us that sea and earth are being used interchangeably. It's to emphasize two different viewpoints. Coming out of the sea emphasizes their Gentile character, their Gentile empires. Their coming out of the earth emphasizes their humanity. These are human empires. Daniel is basically told in verse 17 that the four empires that he saw in the image in Daniel 2 are the same four empires represented by these beasts this time. Verse 18 says, "But the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, even forever and ever." He says that while it is the Son of Man who rules over this kingdom, it is the saints of the Most High who will ultimately receive the kingdom of men. Now, in the Old Testament, the term saints was used of Israel. This is not the church. Daniel knows nothing about the church. Daniel writes about the saints, meaning Israel. Daniel requests some further interpretation regarding the fourth beast in verses 19 to 22. "Then I desired to know the truth concerning the fourth beast, which was diverse from all of them, exceeding terrible, whose teeth were of iron and its nails of brass, which devoured, brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with its feet." Daniel is not interested in anything else regarding the first three beasts, but only in knowing more about the fourth beast. And the reason for his interest is because it was diverse from the other beasts. It was diverse from the other kingdoms. There's something different about this one. And in verse 20 to 22, he wants to have a more detailed interpretation of the other horn, which came up after the first 10. And in verse 20, he describes to us what he saw this little horn do. First, he says it came up and it caused 3 of the original 10 horns to be uprooted and fall. So from then on, there were only 8 horns, 7 of the original 10, plus this one extra little horn on this beast. And in verse 21, "I beheld, and the same horn made war with the saints and prevailed against them until the Ancient of Days came. And judgment was given to the saints of the Most High, and the time came that the saints possessed the kingdom." So in verse 21, we're told that it made war with the saints. This is a little horn. Not only that, it said it prevailed against them. It's going to war against the Jewish people, and it will prevail. But eventually, in verse 22, its period of domination was terminated by the coming of the Ancient of Days. Once the judgment is passed and the little horn by the Ancient of Days, he'll be done away with, and the kingdom will pass over to the saints. In verses 23 to 26, we see the fourth beast, which is imperialism, we call it. Now, in Daniel 2, we saw that the fourth empire of imperialism underwent at least 3 successive stages of development. The 3 stages that Daniel 2 dealt with were, first of all, we had a united stage, which we saw was the beginning of the Roman Empire stage. Then we came to the 2-division stage, represented by the 2 legs of Nebuchadnezzar's dream image. And then finally, there was a 10-division stage, represented by the 10 toes of the image. In verse 23, we look at the united stage, verse 23a. "Thus he said, the fourth beast shall be a fourth kingdom upon earth, which shall be diverse from all the kingdoms." Again, its diverseness stems from the introduction of the imperialistic form of government, which Rome did. This then represents the first stage of the fourth empire, which we know as the Roman Empire. Daniel 2 mentions a 2-division stage, but Daniel 7 doesn't mention that particular stage. The next stage that Daniel 7 mentions is a one world government stage. The one world government stage we see in the second half of verse 23. And shall devour the whole earth, and shall tread it down and break it in pieces. So the second stage, which the angel lists at the end of verse 23, it says, it shall devour the whole earth. Now, Rome never did that. Consistently in the Old Testament, the expression the whole earth means universal. In Daniel 2, after the period of the united stage, there was a development into a two-division stage. This two-division stage is not mentioned at all in Daniel chapter 7. We only know about it from Daniel 2. On the other hand, Daniel 2 left this particular stage out. This is a one world government stage because the information given here is that it will devour the whole earth. It will control the whole earth. If verse 23 means anything, there'll have to come a period in world history when the fourth empire of imperialism will devour the whole earth. It doesn't say it shall devour the whole earth. It says, it does say it shall devour the whole earth. When it does, it says it shall tread down and break it in pieces. So we see the 10 division stage in verse 24. And as for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom shall 10 kings arise. So we're told here that this will emerge out of the one world government stage. As for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom shall 10 horns arise. Which kingdom is being referred to here? The kingdom which in verse 23 had devoured the whole earth. Only after there has developed a one world government can we have the rise of 10 separate kingdoms. So for one reason or another, which Daniel doesn't tell us, the one world government will eventually collapse into 10 regional kingdoms, but which will still cover the entire world. Here, the 10 horns of Daniel 7 correspond to the 10 toes of Daniel 2. So only after there has developed a one world government can we have the 10 division stage. Since this kingdom from which this development comes is global in extent, then these 10 kingdoms will also be coexistence right around the world. Second part of verse 24 to 26, we now see the Antichrist stage. And another shall arise after them, and he shall be diverse from the former, and he shall put down 3 kings. He shall speak words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and he shall think to change the times and the law, and they shall be given into his hand until a time and times and half a time. The judgment shall be set, and they shall take away his dominion, to consume and to destroy it unto the end. Now, these verses here state that the Antichrist stage arises after the 10 division stage. And he's going to put down 3 of those 10 kings. One of his first actions will be to destroy 3 of the 10 regional kings. And then just as the fourth empire is diverse from the 3 preceding empires, the Antichrist or the little horn will be diverse from the other 10 horns. In verse 25, we're told several things about the kind of activities the Antichrist will become noted for. First of all, he shall speak words against the Most High. He'll be a blasphemer. Second, he shall wear out the saints of the Most High. Third, we're told he shall think to change the times and the law. The word times here refers to the Jewish festivals. He seeks to change the times and the seasons of the Jewish festivals. Fourth, it then says they shall be given into his hand. Who? The Jewish people will be delivered to him and fall into severe persecution, and he will be allowed to rule only for a time, times, and half a time, which from the other passages in Daniel means 3.5 years. Verse 26, we finally come to the fall of the Antichrist. The judgment shall be set, and eventually they shall take away his dominion to consume and to destroy it unto the end. It'll be final and climactic. to be followed in verse 27 by the kingdom of God. And the kingdom and the dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. So verse 27, we have the establishment of the kingdom of God, and only after the fourth beast has been destroyed, which will come only after the final Antichrist stage, will the kingdom of God be set up on earth. Now in this verse, it is the people of the saints of the Most High. And in Daniel and in the Old Testament, these are the Jewish people who will inherit the kingdom and the dominion. The saints in Daniel refers to righteous Israel, or the remnant of Israel, and not the church. And the chapter 7 ends with Daniel's conclusion regarding his reaction to what he's just seen in verse 28. So Daniel 7, it gives us some more detail about what was given in chapter 2, especially in relation to the fourth empire. So we have Daniel 7, we have the Babylonian Empire, the Medo-Persian Empire, the Hellenistic or Greek Empire, and then we had the United States with them under the Alexander the Great, and we had the 4-division stage under the 4 generals. And then we went to the fourth empire, which we had first off starting was the United Stage, then we had a 1 world government stage, then we have a 10-division stage, then we have the Antichrist stage, and then we have the Messianic kingdom. And that's just putting both of them together, which we'll, so the difference is now here is that in Daniel, we see that there's a 1 world government stage there, which was not in Daniel chapter 2. And we see the Antichrist stage in Daniel 7, but not in Daniel chapter 2. If we combine the 2 chapters together, what we get is, this is essentially the course of the times of the Gentiles, according to Daniel, is that there's going to be 4 Gentile empires: Babylonian, Medo-Persian, Hellenistic, 4th empire. 4th empire we call Imperialism, which we're going to see not too long. And now if you combine it, the 2 chapters, the 4th empire undergoes 5 stages: a United Stage, a 2-division stage, a 1 world government stage, a 10-division stage, the Antichrist stage, and then comes the Messianic kingdom. So we have the summary of the first 3 chapters. We have Babylonian Empire, head of gold, lion-like beast. Different aspects of this empire, you can find them in those passages there, Daniel 1 to 5 and verse 1 to 5 verse 30, and Daniel 7 verse 4. Second empire is the Medo-Persian Empire. That's the arms and breasts of silver and the bear-like beast. We see some different aspects of that empire in Daniel 2:39, Daniel 5:31 to 6:28, Daniel 7 verse 5, 8, 1 to 7, and 10, 1 to 11, 2. Then we have the third empire, which is a Hellenistic empire represented by the belly of brass and leopard-like beast. It started out as a unit under Alexander the Great, but split into 4 divisions at his death. And you see lots of stuff about this in Daniel 2:39, Daniel 7:6, Daniel 8:7 to 27, and Daniel 11:3 to 35. Now, looking at the 4th Gentile empire, which we call the Empire of Imperialism. Now, this is diverse from all the others. And Daniel describes this empire in chapter 2, 40 to 43, 7 to 12, and 19 to 27, chapter 9, verse 27, and chapter 11, verse 36 to 45. The first stage was the United Stage, which was the Roman Empire. Now, it's very common to call the 4th Gentile Empire by that name, the Roman Empire, but it's only true of the first stage of this Gentile empire of imperialism. It has become customary to think in terms of a revival of the old Roman Empire, but that's not warranted by the scriptures. It's more consistent to simply follow through the 5 stages, with the Roman Empire being the first stage, or the United Stage, which lasted from 63 BC to 364 AD. Neither of the Daniel passages allows for gaps or for revival of the old Roman Empire. That's not going to happen. The two-division stage, when did it begin? It began in AD 364 when Emperor Valentinian divided the Roman Empire into an east and west division. From that point on, the empire of imperialism was divided into an east-west balance of power. And since then, history continued to develop essentially in an east-west balance of power. It began in 364 AD with the Western Roman Empire, and that was headquartered in Rome, and the Eastern Roman Empire was headquartered in Constantinople. In the original division of the east-west axis, these two cities control the balance of power. Since then, the balance of power has shifted, but pretty much this is where we are today. We're in an east-west balance of power with the Western democracies and the Eastern Russian communist bloc of countries. Here's a bit of a more burst in it for you. The Eastern division of power remained in Constantinople until 1453, when it collapsed, when the Turks invaded, and then when Constantinople fell, the rulers and stuff, they fled north into Russia, and they infiltrated the government up there and set up a type of Roman government, which is imperialism. And the rulers, what do they call themselves up there? They call themselves czars, and czar is Russian for Caesar. Now, after a while, Russia gave herself the official title of the Third Roman Empire, and eventually the Eastern balance of power was centered in the Soviet Union, communist bloc of nations. But when that collapsed, it's now shifted to Russia, and you can see even today Russia is flexing its muscles today with Ukraine. Now, the Western division of power remained in Rome from 364 to 476, and then when Rome fell, from there it shifted to France, and it was on, especially when power was gained by Charlemagne in AD 800, and he called his domain the Holy Roman Empire of the Frankish nation. And in 962, Otto I of Germany defeated the Franks and set up the Holy Roman Empire of the German nation. And the leaders named themselves Kaisers, which is German for Caesar. So especially after World War I, the Western balance of power has been centered in the democratic nations of the West. And so then in 364, the two-division stage began, and it continues to the present day where we're sitting today. So there's this clear demarcation of an east-west balance of power, and we've been living and are still living in this second stage of the Fourth Gentile Empire, the two-division stage. One world government stage. Now, this stage, remember, was not mentioned in Daniel 2, but it's mentioned in Daniel 7. So at some point, the east-west balance of power is going to have to collapse. So that will allow then for the development of a one world government of some kind. Daniel 7 verse 23 states that at some point, the fourth empire devours the whole earth. So this, remember, is something that Rome never did. So this is something that is still future, and it comes before the tribulation. The 10-division stage would see both Daniel and in the Daniel 2 and the 10 toes, Daniel 7 and the 10 horns. Now, this 10-division stage is clearly said to come out of the one world government stage. For some reason not given by the text, the one world government is going to divide into 10 kingdoms that will cover the whole world, and it will begin before the tribulation until the middle of it. The world will then enter into the fifth stage of development, the Antichrist, or the little horn stage. And this fifth and final stage in the development of the fourth Gentile empire will last for a time, times and a half time. This means it's going to be strictly limited to a period of only 3.5 years. And that will be until the end of the tribulation. So it starts in the middle of the tribulation, where the Antichrist declares war on all 10 of these regional kings. And during the course of the war, he's going to kill 3 of them. Then we go to, this just wraps everything up for us. So we start off with the Babylon, the times of the Gentiles starts off with the Babylonian Empire. It then goes to the Medo-Persian Empire, then the Hellenistic or Greek Empire. That empire started out in the United States under Alexander the Great. When he died, it split to the 4 divisions, 4 generals. Then that went to the 4th empire of what we call imperialism. The United Stage was the first stage. That was the Roman Empire that defeated the Greek Empire. Then that split into a 2-division stage, which is the East-West power, which is where we are today, an East-West balance of power, Western democracies, Eastern bloc of communist countries. Then we go to a one world government stage. Then there'll be a 10-division stage, 10 kingdoms. And then there'll be an Antichrist stage, which is absolute imperialism. And then the Messianic kingdom. That's what we're looking forward to. We're looking forward to the rapture, actually. Okay, that's what we covered tonight. Thank you for coming along. Study hard, grow strong. Thank you.